Hello, everybody. My name is Alan, and it's that time again. Let's talk metal. Before I get started on this particular topic, did want to say to everybody, yes, I've been offline for over a week. We got hit pretty good by Hurricane Helene when it came through the southeastern U.S. I and my family are fine. None of us were injured, and we were extremely lucky in terms of property damage that we had very, very minimal stuff. Our big issue was we were without power for 7.5 days, and that also included internet and even a lot of cell phone service. A lot of towers were taken out and stuff. So, for several days, we couldn't really text or call, no internet access, so communication was almost non-existent for the first few days of that. And it's kind of gradually came back on. Recording this now when things seem to be getting back to stable, at least for my neighborhood. But in a lot of other places, conditions are still extremely bad. But thanks to everybody who's been asking Marty how we were doing and stuff like that. Really appreciate the thoughts and well wishes. And yeah, looking forward to slowly kind of getting things back to normal. We're still kind of helping neighbors here and there with things as best we can. And hopefully, yeah, the region can recover and get back to something close to normal. But for some folks, that's, going to be a very long process. A lot of folks have lost pretty much everything, and that's really sad. Again, our area is bad. It's not as bad as like some scenes we're seeing from places like Asheville, North Carolina. Uh, so yeah, a bad situation, and sorry that I wasn't able to communicate and let folks know we were better earlier. But yeah, even just, sending a text message has been very difficult for a few days. Okay, with all the serious stuff out of the way, for this video, I'm doing a follow-up to the Heavy Metallurgy live stream that was covering the RIOT discography. And I was really looking forward to joining that one with Marty and Sue Verica, but obviously could not due to circumstances. So I had done a ton of homework for it. It's my favorite band, so I do want to kind of follow up, give my own rankings. I want to try to not let this drag out too long. It's a long catalog, but I'll try to keep it short. There are some albums and periods I do have a few anecdotes that I want to add to the conversation that Marty and Sue did not bring up. They brought up a lot of cool points, including some stuff I had never heard about the band. There were some things they kind of raised, but like I don't know why that is. And there are some things that I can fill in some gaps since I've now had a chance to listen to the job they did. They both did a great job on the stream and the rankings. And so this is just kind of a follow-up, basically my take and my rankings of the albums. So without further ado, let's get through them because it's going to take a little while. All right. Debut album, Riot, Rock City. Personal favorite of mine. One of the first albums I heard by the band. I don't remember the exact order of which albums I heard which. I have a feeling this was the second album I heard by them. It was definitely one of the first two or three. Uh, Love pretty much every track on this album. The band sounds extremely tight. You've got early classic heavy metal anthems on here. Some songs have more of like a 70s hard rock vibe. It's kind of hard to pin down. Is this a hard rock album or a heavy metal album? If you consider it a heavy metal album, then it's pretty easily the earliest US heavy metal album that has a modern, like 80s heavy metal sound. Discounting the stuff like Blue Cheer or Sir Lord Baltimore that came out in the late 60s and early 70s and obviously was more blues based, more in that kind of camp. So yeah, an argument can be made that this is the earliest heavy metal album that kind of went for that more modern 1980s heavy metal sound. Some people would say this is still mostly a hard rock album. I can see, both cases for it. Regardless, killer album, chock full of great tracks. Play this one regularly and have for 30 some years now. It is an A plus album for me. It's one of my favorite albums from the 1970s. And in the Riot discography, it is my second favorite of all of them. Marty and Sue had high opinions of this one too. And yeah, we can all agree this is a absolute gem of a debut album. All right. Now, second album, Narita. I don't have a copy of that one, which tells you that this is not going to rank too high. some things with Narita that are a little weird. This is where, they had major label affiliation. And Marty and Sue had brought up, that it was kind of odd to them that, the band had attracted a big label so early. There's a funny story about that. And some of these anecdotes I'm telling, including this one, can be seen on the three-part video uh, sort of history of the band. I think it's over on the Metal Vault channel. It's a really good, takes a while to get through all three parts, but it covers a lot of interviews with band members, past and present, goes into a lot of their history. So supposedly the deal with Narita was that they got onto Capitol because of Sammy Hagar. That around 79, he was lining up a tour of the UK, and the sort of Hagar camp was very worried that his current material was going to be a little bit too lightweight to go over well in the UK. Because in 79, of course, you were starting to see things gear up for the new wave of British heavy metal. Bands like Judas Priest, Motorhead, Saxon, Def Leppard. All of these bands were, really kind of starting to surge forward a bit. I don't know much about Sammy Hagar's material, but apparently they felt like him going over to tour for the new material might be considered a little bit too weak. And someone in the Hagar camp, I don't know if it was Sammy or just someone on his management team, knew that Riot's debut album had been received pretty well in the UK. A lot of the new wave of British heavy metal folks were very keen on this album. And so they wanted to take Riot with them as an opening act to kind of add some weight to the tour lineup. Capitol, I believe it's Capitol. Again, sorry if I'm off on a few details. It's been a long week. But anyway, the Hagar's record label, of course, didn't want to pay to add a band to the tour package that wasn't on their label. It seemed that would have been a very weird thing to do at the time. So basically, as a favor to Hagar's camp, the label signed Riot. Really didn't have any interest in the band, but like, okay, now we can put you guys together on a tour and send you to the UK, and it makes sense to us since both bands are our bands. And so that's how they got picked up by a major at this point. It's also why they didn't get a lot of support moving forward, though. With the Narita album, for example, the band were famously sent to a recording studio that was mostly known for doing like commercials and radio jingles. So, yeah, not the label had very little interest and offered very little support. Narita's not a bad album overall. It's just one that I never reach for. Um, it's an album to me that starts off kind of slow. I think the B-side's better than the A-side. Um, it's one of those rare albums where I think it's actually better if you play the B-side first and then the A-side, because that puts some of the better songs close to the front. Some of the more mundane tracks get kind of just buried in the middle. The cover of Born to Be Wild is then pushed towards the end rather than being so early in the record. Covers early in the record always feel a little out of place. I prefer them near the end of the record. So I think if you kind of play B-side, then A-side, the album fares a little better. So it's not a bad album. It's just one I never reach for it, and as such, I don't feel a need to own it. I would still give it a grade of like probably B minus, C plus. I mean, it's an above average kind of record. It's just not one I really ever am going to play very much. It doesn't have, those really classic songs like, Warrior or Overdrive from the debut that I want to hear over and over again. So yeah, rank of 12 for Narita. Um, that's probably heresy to some folks. And again, like I said, not a bad album at all. It's just not the set of songs I'm looking to hear from this era of Riot. All right, moving on then to Fire Down Under. This one, of course, is kind of the classic Riot album. If most people only know one or two albums by the band, this is going to be one of them. This one came out in 1981. And there's some funny history to this album too that didn't come up on the stream. This album almost never saw the light of day because again, the label wasn't really interested in this band. The guys went into the studio, recorded the album, and the label just put it on the shelf. Thought, yeah, thanks, whatever. Put the can on the shelf in the vault and really had no interest in releasing it. This was delivered to the label in 1980. This album could have come out in 1980, and they sat on it forever. One of the big reasons it finally came out was that there was a strong grassroots effort, especially in the new wave of British heavy metal circles, to push the label to let this album be released. There were, big advertisements taken out in some of those British weekly publications like Sounds and NME, with a lot of the new wave of British heavy metal luminaries like Neil Kay weighing in and really putting pressure on the label, basically trying to shame them into releasing the album. Folks collected something like 4,000 signatures at different heavy metal venues and events, basically demanding, Capitol release the RIOT album that they were sitting on. And the pressure eventually worked. So, in this day and age, it's easy to be cynical about corporations and, people's ability to push back. Sometimes it does have the effect you want to. So basically, just with this, kind of constant, incessant pressure in the heavy metal music press of the day, they got the label to finally give the album a proper release. And of course, it's become one of the defining albums of their career. But we were that close to never having this album put out. And it could have been out in 1980. Imagine if this had been released in 1980. Does this become the earliest 80s US heavy metal album? It might. But again, I have to kind of make a case here. I was going to do a separate video on this, but I'm just going to roll it in here. There's not a huge change in sound from album number one to album number two to album number three. If we consider this, Fire Down Under, to be a bona fide heavy metal album, what is making this so distinctive in sound from Narita and Rock City that we consider those two hard rock albums instead of heavy metal albums? I think you can make a case that if this is a heavy metal album, and I think most people would agree it is, then you almost have to say that the first two are also heavy metal albums, which would again push Rock City back as, being way ahead of its time as the earliest heavy metal album by a US band that had a modern, sound to it. People can disagree. Marty and Sue both, mentioned that they kind of, feel like this has a lot of 70s hard rockisms to it. It does, but so does Fire Down Under on some tracks. Uh, you know, Rock City's got tracks like Warrior that are bona fide heavy metal killers. And so does Fire Down Under. You can say that, sure, these should be in different camps. Fire Down Under's heavy metal, Riot City and Narita are hard rock. I think you are starting to really split some hairs there. And I do have to wonder if some of it is just a bias based on the release years, that people see like a 1970, 7 date for Rock City, and they feel like it just has to be 70s hard rock because it has a 70s date. And then they see a 1981 date on this and like, oh, well, by 1981, it's allowed to be heavy metal. But in 77, no, it couldn't be heavy metal then. Uh, I really don't know. There's a lot of days where I feel like we ought to call this heavy metal for sure. Anyway, back to Fire Down Under then. Again, most people rank this at the top of the list, if not very close to the top of the list. Yeah, in the past, I've noted, this one doesn't, it's not, my favorite Riot album. The deal with this one for me is that it's got 3 classic songs on it, and then it kind of plateaus and levels off a lot. There are some good, sort of, hidden gems on this one. There's a couple of tracks I'm not crazy about on this one, but I think sometimes I am a little too hard on it because it has 3 tracks that are as good as any heavy metal songs that came out in the 1980s by any band from any country. You've got Fire Down Under, you've got Swords and Tequila, and you have Outlaw. Most bands, even long-lived bands, can go their entire career and never write a single song that's as good as any of those 3. This band made all 3 for one album. Uh, and the fact that it is so top-loaded, again, I think sometimes I hold that against it. It's just like, yeah, you've got 3 of the best songs ever, but what about track number 4? And maybe that's not really fair of me. Yeah, as such, for this ranking, I've got Fire Down Under ranked as number 3 in the Riot discography. I don't reach for it as often as Rock City. I sometimes don't play this album all the way through. Sometimes I do play it for, the songs I like the most and skip a few here and there. But it is a huge part of their discography. I'm not going to push it down in the rankings. With 3 huge songs like that, it deserves to be, way up at the top of the list. But yeah, the backstory on that one is, kind of crazy weird. All right, after that, before album number four, they go through more lineup changes. This band's always been plagued with lineup changes. Guy Speranza leaves as a vocalist. Sue had some really interesting insights on the background of that. Um, and Rhett Forrester comes in for album number four, which is Restless Breed, which I also don't have a copy of to show, so we know where this is going. I want to make it clear. I like Rhett Forrester's voice. I've heard him in other projects, including like the Jack Starr solo album. I like his voice. I like his style. The band changes into kind of more of a bluesy hard rock direction, and I'm okay with that. It's not a huge knock against them. I don't mind that. It's just for whatever reason, the Restless Breed album doesn't come together for me very well, and I rank it 14th. It is my least favorite Riot album. I would still give it a grade of like around C. On a good day, I'll call it C plus. A bad day, I'll call it C minus. Over the years, I have come to like about half the tracks on it. For me, there just aren't really many tracks that would be like, on the best of Riot track list. If I was doing my own personal Riot anthology, I could probably pass on everything on this album. I could find a song or two I like enough to include, but if I was, if I had to cull it down by a song or two, the Restless Breed tracks would probably be some of the first to go. And there are some tracks on it I really don't like either. I think one thing that hurts the album overall is the production. I've never liked the way it sounds, and I've heard a couple of different pressings of it. Maybe there's a different remaster somewhere that sounds much better, but something about the sound quality just doesn't strike me right. And overall, this set of songs just it does not impress me as the best material. It comes out, pretty, quick on the heels of Fire Down Under. It's just a year later, but has this seismic lineup change in it. The band's, trying to tour a lot and everything there. It just feels like this is a very hectic time for the band, and it's hard for me to not believe that the album was very rushed in coming out. I think all that shows. And just as the cherry on top, I hate the cover art. I hate the cover art so much. It has such an stereotypical early 80s look from the way from the way the band's logo is done to the bad kind of like airbrushy art of the stupid looking kid with, the half, T-or face. It looks like something you would have seen on like the box for an Atari 2600 cartridge in 1982. I'm okay with some retro nostalgia. I don't need that though. So again, it is not a junk album. It's not a crap album, but it's a Riot album. I never reach for it. If I want to hear Rhett Forrester sing for Riot, I will reach for album number five, which is Born in America. This one gets overlooked a lot. Restless Breed still seem to have, a ton of distribution stuff. You see that album everywhere. It's the other album people will know by the band. This album is very overlooked by the band. I think at this point, yeah, their, major label deals days were pretty much done, and they got this out however they could. But on this one, the songwriting all clicks together really well for me. The sound quality, again, production is a little weird. It's not the best in the world, but this has a fantastic set of songs on it. Again, I'm trying to go kind of quick through these tonight. I don't want to break them down track by track, but there's a lot of really good stuff here. Rhett sounds fantastic, and just feels like maybe they had enough time here to start to gel, really click with that new sound, having Rhett front the band, and really do some A plus kind of material. As such, this album, I've always ranked it really high. I have it ranked fifth, and for me, it's like an A minus kind of album. It's really that good. There's a few tracks here that aren't quite as strong. If I remember right, it ends with maybe like Promised Land's not my favorite. It could have had a better ending. But yeah, Gunfighter is amazing. Let's see. The cover of Devil Woman works really good. Riot always does a lot of covers and a lot of instrumentals. Some of them work better than others, but yeah, it's a common theme. Wings of Fire is great. You Burn in Me is fantastic. Sue pointed that song out. The title track, Born in America, Ring from the Law. All these are great. You see Riot starting to really lean into some of those Western themes that they have a lot of songs with kind of that, gunfighter kind of theme over the years. Fantastic album. If you have missed this one, it's a great one to go back and check out. Much better than Restless Breed for my money. And then the band kind of broke up and disappeared for several years. Born in America was 83. It'd be 5 years before another album came out. Now, there was a lot of activity kind of behind the scenes during those years. It's not like the band went completely dormant. A big part of it was Mark Reale ended up spending a lot of time in San Antonio. San Antonio had been a market that was really good for Riot in the earlier 80s. They had a local radio DJ who did like the hard rock, heavy metal stuff. He had kind of pushed Riot quite a bit. So San Antonio was one of their sort of strongholds in the early 80s when they would tour. And Mark really loved the area. So he went down there, spent a lot of his free time there, even before this 5 year hiatus. During those years is when he started hanging out, just playing for fun, practicing with musicians, like Ron Van Stavern, um, who was in a band called Slayer that was from San Antonio, better known as like SA Slayer or San Antonio Slayer, to differentiate them from some other band who had the name. I don't know who that was. Um, so yeah, Mark was, still active, still working on things. There actually were some demos recorded around that time under a band name Narita. So still kind of sticking to that theme a little bit. And so yeah, again, things were kind of, turning along, but by the time it was time to release a new album, you had basically Mark with a completely new lineup, including, Van Stavern from SA Slayer, including Bobby Jerzombek on drums. His brother, and is it Rob Jerzombek? Again, sorry, I'm a little off on some details tonight, but he was also a San Antonio Slayer alumni. You had Mark Edwards on drums for a couple of the songs, but he had a commitment with one of the West Coast bands, somebody like Steeler. Yeah, so he, couldn't fully make it happen. But yeah, so the band comes back in '88, looking like this, and they released the album Thundersteel. And as both Marty and Sue correctly pointed out, this is a landmark in American heavy power metal. It's almost a flawless album. This album has 9 tracks, and the first 7 tracks are flawless. They are perfect. There's not a thing I would change on any of those first 7 songs. You got the title track as the opener, and it is a tour de force of a new wave of American power metal. This isn't, just taking, the, metal church sound or stuff like that. It's focusing more on, again, more speed, more melody. Some people might mistakenly point to this and be like, oh, okay, they're trying to copy what Halloween was starting to do in, their Keepers era. Yeah, but again, Mark had been working on these songs and this kind of material for several years there. It's not like he heard Keeper of the Seven Keys Part 1 in '87 and then started writing this material. Not at all. This was almost happening, in tandem with what Halloween and those bands were doing in Germany around the same time. You did have other bands in the US who had a similar kind of approach to power metal. Savage Grace is one that comes to mind, but Thundersteel was kind of the benchmark for that. Very few other bands were doing anything close to this style in America at the time, and very few have ever come close to nailing it this good ever since. This is my #1 album in the Riot catalog. It's an A+ album. It in my top 10 albums of all time. I don't know exactly where it would fall. It might be in my top 5 albums of all time. It really is that good. The only sort of blemish on the album, I said the first 7 songs are flawless. Tracks 8 and 9 are seem a little out of place. Track 8 is okay, but it feels a little more mundane. And track 9 is kind of an odd one. It's what is it? Buried Alive, Telltale Heart. There's some sound effects and stuff like they're trying to kind of play into the Edgar Allan Poe thing. There's some bias because I've never been a huge Poe fan. I just never enjoyed his writing very much. But somehow this song just doesn't seem to come together. It's like they're trying for something a little different and it just doesn't quite work. In a weird way, it sort of foreshadows what happens on the next album, which we'll get to in a moment. Something else that should be pointed out, by this time or around this time, Mike Flintz is at least performing with the band live. He's not officially a recording member of the band at this point. He, of course, plays a huge role in the band moving forward in the near future. But yes, Thundersteel, #1 album, no doubts about it. Okay, about that next album, The Privilege of Power, 1990. This is the follow-up to it. Controversial album. This was like the one album that Sue and Marty had very differing opinions on, and it doesn't surprise me because that happens a lot with this album. Some people really enjoy this album, like Marty did. And some people really don't like this album, like Sue. Some background on this album that is worth considering here. The band had done pretty well with Thundersteel. It generated a good amount of buzz. It didn't top the Billboard charts or anything, but it definitely got the band's name kind of back on the map. And some people didn't like it because it was too different from the old material, but a lot of people really did, dig the Thundersteel stuff. So they needed a follow-up. They're already on vocalist number three. I didn't mention that, but yeah, Tony Moore's on board as the third vocalist on Thundersteel. Lineup comes back for the Privilege of Power album. And Mark Reale, really wants to kind of, push the band forward. And so, plans are drawn up where they're going to do things like introduce brass into some of the songs with like, bringing Tower of Power in to do some guest musician spots. And other guys in the band were really psyched about this. Tony Moore said in interviews that, yeah, this sounded amazing to me. This is like, holy crap, no one's done anything like this before. We're not just going to rest on our laurels. We're not just going to make Thundersteel 2. It's going to sound like Thundersteel 2, but it's going to have, all this other stuff in it. We're really going to try to take it to the next level and do something unique that no other band is doing. And they did. Uh, the end result is interesting because there's another component to it. So, yes, you have, first off, a very diverse set of songs. You have some absolute speed metal burners that can sit right there side by side with Thundersteel. Opener On Your Knees is a driving metal anthem. It has these brass elements, though, that really throw some people off. Uh, the first time you hear it, yeah, it's kind of one of those, what the heck, where did that come from moments. I dig it. I think it's really cool. It sounds neat and it adds a neat, unique dimension to it. It's not the only song like that, though. You've got, let's see, uh, Dance of Death, Storming the Gates of Hell. This is as good as any blistering power metal song you'll ever hear. You've also got Black Leather and Glittering Steel, and it's 1,000 miles per hour, and it is glorious. This song could have been on Judas Priest's Painkiller album. It's that intense. It's that level. So there is some really high octane, amazing songs on here. Other songs go in very different directions. The song Killer has Joe Lynn Turner do some guest vocals. Moore and Lynn do kind of a back and forth thing. They're not rapping, but they're have a different kind of vocal cadence to it, has a very different feel. I think that song has another Tower of Power appearance. You've got yeah, a long instrumental at the end, which again is a cover too, Racing with the Devil on a Spanish Highway. It's originally by some 70s guitar virtuoso whose name I do not remember. You have other songs, Metal Soldiers, more kind of a slower, more anthemic one. They've done those kind of songs before on Thundersteel. One thing that helps Thundersteel's kind of a diverse album too. Not every song's just 1,000 miles per hour. They've got tracks like Johnny's Back and Sign of the Crimson Storm, songs that reel it in. They play up the anthemic part, dial down the speed a little bit. They're doing the same thing on this album. Uh, some of the tracks that draw criticism. You have things like Little Miss Death is a little bit of a goofy song. I don't mind it. It's catchy enough to still be fun. Sue pointed out one that bothers her a lot is the song Marianne. It's extremely poppy, I agree. It's also extremely well written. This song gets stuck in my head and it lives there. It has its own apartment and pays rent. It stays in my head so much. It's not a very heavy song, but it's an incredibly nice, cool, catchy song. I've got no problem with it. I love the song. What else have we got on here? Runaway, is kind of your more metal ballad. Riot's good at metal ballads. It works okay. So yeah, even though the songs are very diverse, I think most of them work extremely well. Now, the other elephant in the room. A lot of these songs have weird intros to them. Basically, a lot of them sound like where you're flipping through TV stations, listening to snippets from news broadcasts or snippets from documentaries. Like I think it's the lead into Killer. There's this little monologue. Sounds like again like a radio recording of someone explaining how several of these big corporations like DuPont manufacture components that are used in atomic weapons. And to a lot of people, it's a little too over the top. They're like, what the hell is all this? That's a good question. And the band maintains, if in interviews with like, Tony and Van Staveren and folks, the band maintains they were completely unaware that it was going to be done, that it was a management decision. The manager from the time is also talked to. If you watch again that three-part series on Metal Vault, they interview the guy about it. You can watch it and draw your own conclusions about whose side you believe. But the band's take is that they recorded the songs. Yes, they had all the brass. Yes, they had the tracks like Marianne and Little Miss Death. But there was none of this, sound clippy kind of stuff involved. The tape's in the can. They're all ready to send it to the label. And then the manager disappeared for like a month with all the tapes. And the record label's calling the band members getting pissed because where the hell is the tape? You're supposed to deliver the tape. And they're having to tell the label, manager has the tape. We can't find the guy. He's not returning our calls. He's not at the studio. We don't know where the hell he is, what he did with it. And that the manager showed back up like about a month later, gave the label the tape. And he had overseen adding all of this, all these weird sound clips and news bites and documentary, snippet things to it. And the band was just like, what the fuck did you do to our record? So they maintained that they never had any say in that and they didn't approve of it. A little bit of his take from it is that he really felt, and he has a point here that by the 1990, late 80s or 90s, that heavy metal was getting a lot smarter. That whether you looked at things like, Queensryche, or whether you looked at a lot of the thrash metal bands, they were all writing songs that were a lot more sort of socially conscious. They were talking about nuclear war, pollution, corruption, politics, religion. The days of just writing songs about, drinking beer and, riding, motorcycle around and waving a big sword were kind of in the past. Days of thrash bands just, writing Jump in the Fire were gone, and you were getting songs coming out like One on Metallica's And Justice for All album. And their manager felt that, to be relevant, Riot really needed to come across as more topical. They needed to become, more thinking man's metal, that they couldn't just, still be writing Swords and Tequila all over again. And so it was kind of his idea to add all these components to make it a little more cerebral. The phrase that I've heard different people use, including I think Tony Moore uses it in an interview, is that basically, the guy wanted to turn it into like an Operation Mindcrime thing. And this was his way of doing it, to try to maybe sort of weave a concept through the album with all these little soundbite things and mind crime-ify the new Riot album. And again, a lot of people don't like it. I think it works absolutely fine. It took me a while to get used to it. On first listen, yeah, it was a real head scratcher, but I actually like the sound clips. I think it's kind of a cool and novel approach. Again, nobody's really ever done anything like this before or since. And as such, it's kind of a unique entry in the Riot catalog. I think it's a great follow-up to Thundersteel. It's got enough of the speed and power and glory of that era to maintain it, but it does something different as well. They tried it, obviously didn't work out well for them, and they backed off of it moving forward. But I think it's a very awesome album. I've got, and sorry, I spent a lot of time on this one, but there's a lot of info there that Sue and Marty didn't dive into that I wanted to. I rank this as my fourth favorite Riot album. I could almost push it to third, but I'm just not going to push Fire Down Under all the way down to fourth. For me, it's another A minus rank album. Yeah, it's not perfect. It has its flaws. I get why some people aren't into it. I get, Marty even pointed out, yeah, even the cover art just doesn't feel right for it. But for me, it's an amazing set of songs. But it also was the end of this particular lineup because, again, a lot of tension and stress with the manager reportedly disappearing with the tapes and then mucking it up. Guys in the band didn't get paid for this album either. Van Staveren and Zerzombeck, the only reason they got a dime from this album was they noticed that, like, the Tower of Power guys, the guest musicians, were getting cut checks. And they figured out that basically that was happening because they were on file with, like, the New York Musicians Union. And as such, if you or credited as a guest musician on something, you get money. And so to get some money, Van Staveren and Joe Zombek basically had to go that route. They had to register with the New York State Musicians Union and file that we played on this album, and so they each got I think something like $1,700, and that's the only way that basically they had to pretend to an extent they were treated like guest musicians when it was they were actually of course full members of their own band. That's the only way they got any money out of the deal. That's how effed up things were. So things fall apart. And a couple of years go by, and let's see where are we at. 93, the band resurfaces, and you get an album called Nightbreaker. What your copy of Nightbreaker looks like depends on where you got it. American pressing looks like this with kind of a shattered glass night cityscape thingy. It's okay. Um, these other two, I want to get them mixed up. I always do. This one, I think the bird cover is maybe the Japanese version. No, I think this is the European version with the bird and the bullseye. And I think the shark is the Asian version for Japan and Pacific countries. If I got them mixed up, sorry, it's not the end of the world. And again, we've got some lineup changes here. New vocalist on vocalist number 4 with Mike DeMeo. And the band's sound changes here too. This goes, a little bit more towards the bluesy hard rock side, not as much as during the Rhett Forrester era, but yeah, going, maybe straddling the line a little bit more, not moving away from the power metal sound of the last two albums, not going as far into like blues hard rock territory as the Rhett Forrester albums. This one I've always heard was essentially originally just a set of demo recordings, kind of getting used to Mike being in the band, and they turned out good enough that some of the labels kind of rushed them out as a record, which the band may or may not have been exactly happy about. I've heard different things on that. For my money, though, it's a fantastic set of songs, and Mike DeMeo sounds great on it. This was not DeMeo's first band, and DeMeo was another guy from the Long Island music scene, New York being big, Riot being from New York. There's this old compilation album called Arctic Records Presents. I guess Arctic Records was a small label. They did some releases for like tri-state area bands, but in particular like with Long Island. And so a lot of the bands featured on here were, from that scene, including this band called Cameo, and just a two-man project. But yeah, Michael Scott DeMeo doing vocals and drums for Cameo in the Long Island scene. And so I'm guessing they knew him from the local scene and they picked him up. The DeMeo album is kind of glossed over a little bit in the Metal Vault Riot documentary. I'm not really sure why that is. They don't interview DeMeo at all. I don't know if he wasn't available or didn't want to talk about it. But yeah, there's a lot of detail put into what happened before this point, less detail going forward. Anyway, they get this set of songs out. It's a fantastic set of songs. Sue pointed out that, Harry Conklin from Jag Panzer had worked with the band a little bit on some material around this time. I think there were multiple points in Riot's history where Conklin almost became a Riot member and never quite did. The songs that he demoed with them are quite good too. But yeah, so they've got DeMeo in the band. Nightbreaker is a fantastic sounding set of songs. The album's a little long. It's got a couple of covers. Um, Marty pointed out it has a really great cover of Deep Purple's Burn on it. At least some versions do have a cover of Procol Harum's Wider Shade of Pale, classic track. And they do a good job on that also. One reason now, some folks may be thinking, why do you have 3 copies of this, Alan? Well, first off, I'm a sick little monkey, and you already knew the answer to that, so shame on you for asking. But second, all 3 versions of this do have slightly different track lists. Since these are from different territories, they all kind of ended up with different bonus tracks. And being a sick little Riot monkey, I wanted all of them, and most of the bonus tracks on all 3 are really good. So it is there actually is some unique music on each of the 3 versions. Nightbreaker, good start to the kind of Mark IV DeMeo era. I rank it as 6. It's another A- album for me. Could have trimmed a few songs. There's a couple that aren't great. Sue pointed out like one of the good songs just runs a little too long, and she's right. Great song, but a little too long. But yeah, still a fantastic album. I thought it would be in my top five for Riot, and it fell just outside that. It's how strong the band's catalog is. And but yeah, again, even album number six is still getting an A minus kind of grade. All right, that set them up to move forward in 1995 with Brethren of the Long House. To my knowledge, this album was not released in the US at the time. I'm sure it's had a US pressing somewhere since then. This one is a concept album. Marty and Sue are a little iffy on the details with this one, but yeah, it is a concept album and is meant to kind of play into and follow along with the whole Last of the Mohicans story, which was a very popular movie in the mid 90s as well. And so yeah, it's kind of playing into that, the story of the Five Nations and such. It's a very good, very solid album. But I agree with Sue's take. It's for whatever reason, it's just not one I ever reach for from this era of Riot. And I tend to forget it. The songs just aren't quite as memorable as tracks from some of the other albums that they did with Mike DeMeo. Mike sounds fine on it. This one has a different drummer than Bobby Jerzombek was kind of in and out of the band a few times. I think this is one where he's out. The new drummer works absolutely fine. Everything you want in a Riot album is still here. And there are still some absolutely great songs. This has the Gary Moore cover of Out in the Fields, which fits in really good with the concept of the album, I think. Um, but yeah, like the intro theme is called Last of the Mohicans, and they also use it as the outro at the end of the album. The melody comes up a couple of times. So again, yeah, it's definitely meant to be a concept that ties together. So very good album. Nothing at all wrong with it. I've played this for some friends who really latched onto it and they love the album to death. I like it. It's just one I don't reach for very often. Could maybe just be lacking a little bit of memorability. I have it ranked as eighth in their catalog. I would still give this a solid B plus kind of grade. It's still quite good. Whenever I play it, I'm just like, wow, why don't I play this more? But then I never do play it more. So ranks a little bit lower. Still a great album. Let's see. Sue mentioned that, the band had a lot of success in Japan and released some EPs and stuff over there. This is one of those. Angel Eyes has a couple of unreleased tracks on it, which are both really, really good. So I had to track that down as well. And this kind of leads into when they kind of got their second wind in terms of having more visibility and more popularity in the heavy metal spheres. The Inishmore album. This is album number 10, came out in 97 with Metal Blade. So again, just being on a bigger US label once again, at least for metal purposes, gets them a lot more visibility. And it is a good album. Both Marty and Sue articulated, the strengths of this one really well. Again, a little bit of kind of an Irish Celtic theme to it. It's worked in really tastefully. It doesn't dominate the album. Some really strong songs here. This one, if anyone's unfamiliar with the DeMeo era of the band and wants to kind of check out what it sounds like, this would be an excellent one to tell you what they're doing. I would highly recommend it. Mm, it's another album that has held up incredibly well over time. Maybe a little bit long. Marty rightly pointed out that some of the albums around this point start to feel a little long. It's, the era of the CD and everybody kind of pushing over the 1 hour mark on more and more things. But yeah, I've got this one ranked seventh. So not quite as good as Nightbreaker, but a step above Brethren of the Longhouse. It's still a strong B plus kind of album. The band's back on the map, getting more attention once again. That's great. They take advantage of that a couple of years later. Let's see where we're at. Yes, 1999. Sons of Society comes out, also on Metal Blade. Joe Zombek is back on this album. Pretty sure he was on Inishmore as well. Sons of Society. This one, most people rank it pretty high. It got a lot of, strong reviews at the time. A lot of folks feel it's, probably the best album they made in the 1990s. It was interesting to me that both Marty and Sue were a little down on this album, that they felt like the songs weren't quite as strong as Inishmore, and that again, the length of the album started to hurt it a little bit here. In general, I do agree with them. I thought this might be one of the albums that I would be down on, and the two of them would be like, "What is your problem? This album's great." But all three of us actually kind of line up on this one. For me, it's again, not a bad album. It's got a lot of very good songs on it, and the songs are varied. DeMeo's good on the fast songs. He's good on the ballads. He's good on the more hard rock kind of oriented songs. But yeah, with 11 tracks, it takes a while to get through the album, and it's not one I go back to a ton. It's a little bit like Brethren of the Longhouse. When I play it, I'm usually like, wow, there are a lot of good songs on here. I tend to forget how good the album is. And therein lies the problem. It's a good album, but the songs just aren't as memorable to me as a lot of the other Riot albums. Sons of Society, where did I put this one in the ranking? Let's go over here and see. Sons of Society ended up ninth on my list. I give it a grade of B. And for those folks who like it more, I can see why. Tracks like what Dragonfire is great. I think Bad Machine is a really cool song that DeMeo gets to show off on. Twist of Fate is a cool one. There's a lot of good stuff on here. Time to Bleed is good. I like that one. But yeah, and there's also a few that I'm not as high on. On the Wings of Life is a really good track. They almost always have good openers. Sometimes Riot ends on like an instrumental or stuff. So sometimes the end of the album's not as good as the beginning. But yeah, still a good album by all means. It brought Tior back to the album art for the first time in several years, which I'm all about. But yeah, not my personal favorite from this era, but a very solid album, nothing against it. All right, then 2002 saw the release of Through the Storm. This would be their last one for Metal Blade. Um, this is an album that tends to get very poor reviews. If you look it up on like Metal Archives, the reviews really stink on this one. I do not get what people's problem is. I think the first six songs on this album are, again, just it's a flawless run of six tracks, just back to back to back to back to back to back. Perfect. The second half of the album does lose the plot a little bit. And both Sue and Marty pointed these things out. Sue was like, no, this is a great album. I went back and listened to it and thought it was great. And Marty was impressed with it on, first impression too. But he rightly pointed out that, yeah, the album seems to lose its way towards the end. It's another one that feels a little long. One thing that's a little weird with the ending of this one is that the last three tracks, at least on my pressing, these are tracks 9, 10, 11. You've got the UFO cover, Only You Can Rock Me, which kind of makes sense. It's Marty pointed out UFO is kind of a reference point for the band, especially early on. So yeah, they do a good job on the cover. But then it is also followed by two instrumentals. We have Isle of Shadows. Like I said, Riot tends to end on instrumentals, which is not my favorite way to end an album. But then there's another instrumental. The actual final track on the album is a cover of Here Comes the Sun. So it's a really weird end to the album that you go cover song, instrumental, and then an instrumental cover. It's like, why do you end an album that way? Well, part of what happened here is that while the band was recording this, George Harrison passed away. And Harrison was a huge influence on Mark Reale when he was a kid learning to play guitar and wanting to become a guitarist and stuff. If you remember right, there's a nice little write-up blurb in here from Mark, just kind of doing like a paragraph or so. It's a quick tribute to George Harrison commenting on his passing. And so, it's the idea was, that he wanted to do some kind of little tribute to one of his old guitar heroes and get it into the album. So it was probably a last second addition to the track list and just got kind of stapled onto the end, which explains the weird track list at the end. So yeah, you get six tracks in a row that are absolutely just beautiful. Then tracks 7 and 8 are okay. Those two feel kind of average to me. And then you have UFO cover, instrumental, and cover of an instrumental from George Harrison. So a little weird on the track listing there. Through the Storm is, though, again, it's an album I've always defended, I've always liked. Um, when you rank these, some things just end up further down than you thought. Through the Storm, I ended up ranking 10th with a B minus. I really thought this would be ahead of Sons of Society. That ending I guess can't pretend that the last, three tracks aren't there or that the last five tracks, I've got, six tracks at the beginning are great, but then the last five tracks are, there's not a whole lot there for me. So that's the kind of album I give a B minus grade to. I like it. I think it is good, but it has one noticeable flaw that's going to hold it down a little bit. but I would still recommend this to anyone. It's still six great Riot songs, and it's not like any of the other five are bad. It's just kind of a weird side B to the album. All right, moving on. 2006. So you have a 4-year gap here. And I remember, for me, this was kind of weird. It's like, why aren't they doing anything else? What's going on? They did, these three albums on Metal Blade. I thought they were all great, but some people, yeah, I didn't realize Through the Storm was not received well. Other stuff went on. So eventually, 2006, they get this one put out, Army of One. And this would be the end of the DeMeo era. And again, this one I don't think got a US release in 2006. I think, I had to get it as like an import thing. This is, yeah, import from Japan. This one still has some good songs on it. But as Sue and Marty pointed out, this album is ridiculously long at 13 songs. Some of them are good, some of them are not. Some of them do feel a little bit, a lot more like radio ready, commercial friendly. A track like Knocking at My Door is a good example of that. It's a good song for them. It's almost like the Marianne situation all over again. It is not a heavy song, but it's a very well written song and it's performed great. So I still dig it. It'll still get stuck in my head. Um, but yeah, it's just a lot of songs to get through this one. Still good ones. I think Marty and Sue or Sue one have commented that they felt like the closer, darker side of light was a little different, a little odd. It is, but it's extremely well done. Love it a lot. So this one, Army of One, I rank it 13th. So it's second from the last. I would still give this album a B minus or maybe a B kind of grade. So I mean, it's still a good album for me. But it is one I reach for very rarely because it takes a long time to get through it. The other DeMeo albums are just better, in my opinion. All right, then once again, there's a 5-year gap, and this time they're getting the Thundersteel lineup back together at least as much as possible, and that would be for 2011's Immortal Soul album. And this would be the last album with Mark Reale. Sue talked about Mark's health issues, which had gotten worse and worse over these 5 years. He contributes to this album, but there are varying accounts about how much he was able to contribute to the album and how much of it. By this point, Mike Flint's, if I understand right, Flint's was Mark's guitar student, that he learned from Mark how to play guitar. And the new guitarist they have in the Riot 5 lineup is one of Mike's students. That there's kind of, an interesting and cool lineage through there. But, Mike, had really, taken more of the helm by this point. Both Sue and Marty liked this one quite a bit and ranked it fairly high. If anyone's doing the math, they already know where I'm going to rank this one. This one, to me, is pretty good, but I think this album kind of blows its load very early in the track list. It's another one that's pretty long. My version has 14 songs on it. That be too many songs. But it opens with Riot. Would you think it'd be a good idea for a band this old to release an eponymous song as the opener on an album this deep in their career? You wouldn't. And it's one of the best songs they ever wrote. Sue articulated it really well. What's it going to take to make you right? A lot of the lyrics, Tony Moore doesn't sound as good as he does back from the Thundersteel days. That's the first thing to note. That is a flaw with this album. Tony Moore still sounds okay, but you can tell a lot of years have gone by that maybe he's a bit out of practice or he hasn't been doing, other heavy metal projects along the way. So his voice does sound different by this point. But yes, you get, the absolute classic screamer right off the bat with Riot. Uh, After that, you get Still Your Man, which is another one of their Johnny's Back songs going all the way back to the Thundersteel era. And this song is perfect. It's exactly what you want to hear this lineup of Riot do. You're 2 songs in and you're just thinking, this is Thundersteel all over again, and I'm so happy. And then you get to Crawling, which slows things down a lot and has a very different vibe to it. Wings Are for Angels picks it back up a little bit, but the chorus is very awkward. Even just the song title, Wings Are for Angels. It's a weird phrase to get out of your mouth. You know, Fall Before Me, I like that one quite a bit. That's again got that little bit slower, anthemic, defiant kind of, Sign of the Crimson Storm vibe about it. Ah, what else have we got here? Sins of the Father is a faster, more aggressive song, but again, it feels like it trips over itself a little bit. Some of these songs are like they just don't quite come together. Like again, it's been a long time since this particular lineup worked together, and it feels like they just maybe I really do wish they'd had a chance to do a follow-up album to this because I have a feeling while this album is good, it's sort of proof of concept. I think given a chance to really work out the kinks, the next album could have been an absolute monster. So as it is, for me, this one is a little hit or miss. Insanity's good, but it's got a very sing-song kind of chorus. I don't mind that in some Riot songs, but other people not so big on that. Whiskey Man doesn't do anything for me at all. Yeah. I forget if it's Believe or Echoes. It sounds, the lyrics to that one are kind of sad. It sounds like Tony may be singing about Mark and what's happening to him. It's actually about a friend of his from his days in music school who I think ended up committing suicide after going through some really rough stuff. So yeah, there's some, definitely some somber emotions in some of the tracks. This one, I thought it would rank higher, but when all the dust settled, I ended up ranking this one 11th. I give it a grade of B. Um, I don't really go back and play it very much, and when I do, I start skipping tracks on this one. I'll play those first couple of tracks and revel in them, but then I don't really need to hear Crawling. I don't need to hear Whiskey Man. So this one for me starts to have some issues with it. Yeah, grade of 11, grade of B, maybe B minus. Maybe if I play it a bunch of times and get back in the right mood for it, maybe it goes a little closer to B plus. But yeah, I don't have this one quite as high as Sue or Marty. Like I said, it's got some fantastic songs, but I think it's extremely front loaded. And then it's a long album that has, hits and misses along the way. So that is where we stopped. When we had talked about the idea with Sue, we decided we would cover, just sort of the Mark Reality era. There's plenty of other stuff you can, of course, dive into with Riot. After Mark passed, there weren't any plans to carry the band forward, but Mark's father talked with Mike Flint's. Mike's very close with Mark's dad. Again, these are all, or well, not all, Van Staverns from San Antonio, but several of these guys are sort of, just local guys there in New York. And Mark's dad really wanted them to carry on. Mike has said, in numerous interviews that he basically was like, please don't let my son's music just kind of die and fade away. If you want to carry on, by all means, please do so. And so they decided to. They did change the band name slightly to Riot 5, noting that they're bringing in their fifth vocalist, who is Todd Michael Hall, who has done really good work with other projects before this. He's worked with, for example, Jack Starr's Burning Star project on albums like Stand Your Ground. They've done 3 albums so far. The most recent came out earlier this year, Mean Streets. I reviewed this one for Heavy Metallurgy. It's a great album. All 3 of these are very good, and they kind of settle in somewhere between close to the Thundersteel territory, but they give a lot of nods to other eras of the band as well. And while I like all 3 of these albums, I don't necessarily go back and play them a lot because, the albums, while they're full of really great songs, they do tend to be pretty self-referential. You'll listen to an album and be like, "Oh yeah, that's obviously the Restless Breed song." And you'll hear another like, "Oh, there's the next song with the Western theme. You've had Outlaw and Gunslinger and Gunfighter. The new album has one called High Noon. There's the reference again. The new one has another kind of, Johnny's Back track. What is that one called on the new album? uh Mean Streets, I think. It's like, oh, there's the follow-up to, Still Your Man, which is the follow-up to Johnny's Back. It's kind of a fun continuity for fans who are deeply invested in the band like I am. But again, sometimes it feels like, okay, I know what you're doing. I know where this comes from. I can just go back and play those instead. But no, they've done a great job. The lineup's extremely good. Mike Flint's is horribly underrated as a guitarist. The dude is fantastic on the guitar, just absolutely amazing. He learned from one of the best, and it really does show. There's other stuff, for Riot too. There's been some side projects. Faith and Fire had a couple of members. I think it was, I want to say Mike Flint's and maybe Tony Moore on this one. Won't not going to sit here and crack it open to figure it out. Oh yeah, but it says on the giant sticker if I would read Mike Moore and Tony Flint's. This one's okay. It's kind of cool to check him out. Mike Flint's has also recently been in the Clean Break project. They have a new album coming out this fall. I'm looking forward to hearing. Mike DeMeo, he's landed on his feet again. It's they kind of gloss over that too. It's like, what happened to the rest of the lineup when Immortal Soul came out? Well, they're just kind of gone. And this happened a couple of times in Riot's, history, like, between Restless or between, Made in America and Thundershow. What happened to all the other guys besides Mark? Well, they're just kind of gone. It happens, but yeah, Mike has done other good stuff. One thing that was really funny to me listening to Marty and Sue's thing, Marty compared Mike DeMeo to Jorn Landa a lot. And so, like, I can hear where Landa got his influence. Well, it's kind of funny because one of, Landa's early successes in heavy metal was singing for the band Masterplan, which also has ex-Halloween members in it. But when Landa stepped away from this band after the second album, the guy they got as a replacement for album number 3 was Mike DeMeo. So yeah, Marty's dead on that those guys kind of operate in the same sonic space. So yeah, there's all kinds of other stuff. Riot, since the Riot 5 years, they've put out a bunch of volumes featuring like old demos and unreleased tracks, studio outtakes and stuff. This is so far that's a 5 disc set that if you line them up the right way, I of course have them backwards. You'll see the Mighty T or they're on the spines. And a big shout out to Jurgen Allman for sending these to me, VCLT. Appreciate it. These aren't hard to find, but they're kind of pricey, so I never had got around to picking them up. He had a set and just sent them to me, which was really kind of him. There's also another set that's been coming out, and each disc features some live shows from throughout the band's history. I haven't picked any of those up yet, but and part of that is I have a lot of those live shows on like CDRs or MP3s back from, CDR trading days. So when I look at those, I'm just like, well, I've already got that show, and I've got that show, and I've got that show, and this disc is $22. I don't think I need to pay $22 to get stuff that I already have. I'm a sick little monkey, but even I'm not that sick of a little monkey. But yeah, there's lots of other goodies you can get tied into the Riot catalog as well. Even Frank, longtime viewer, really cool heavy metal guy, sent me a copy of their October 2022 live performance from Germany, and they sound amazing on here. It's got a good track list too, if I remember right. This has gone long enough. You don't need me to read the track list to you. Anyway, that's are my Riot rankings. Sorry this took a while, but it's a big catalog. It's a big band for me. Hope you enjoyed some of the extra detail I was able to add about a few albums here and there. Kudos to Sue and Marty. They did a great job with the stream. I enjoyed it a ton when I got to finally hear it on playback. And I hope you all did too. If you have missed it by some means, go check it out over on the Heavy Metallurgy channel. And yeah, that's going to be it. So let's wrap this one up and talk metal in the comments down below. Feel free to add your own Riot rankings. If there's any details, again, I probably fudged a few details here, given what's been going on this week. A lot of this stuff that I was ready to talk about kind of got flushed out of the back of my brain. Any corrections are always appreciated in the comments so that people can read them and get the best information possible. That's going to do it for this time. If you're wondering which era of Riot is my favorite, the answer is all of them. And yes, I will always stand by the fact that that seal is the real deal. Tier gets a lot of crap for being a stupid mascot, but sometimes it's so stupid that it's just awesome. Heavy metal mascots in general are kind of a weird thing to begin with. You got a zombie running around. You got like a half-dead guy trying to sell you a bombed-out UN building. I can absolutely get behind a dude with a baby fur seal head wielding an axe, telling you to get off my lawn. So with that, let's call this one to an end. Until next time, everybody take care. And as always, keep banging your baby seal head.